this pause on negotiations means what? Are we done here?
So I don't mean to smile at this, and I certainly mean no disrespect to calling it news. But the fact that there's a pause on negotiations is not a news flash.
Okay.
I mean, right, there's nothing to pause. And in fact, what Russia has been doing steadily before the meeting in Alaska and since has been to be increasingly provocative, including with the drone strikes earlier this week in Poland. And so I find President Trump's comments a little perplexing, probably more than a little perplexing in that regard.
Well, how about the equivalency there? It's like, well, it takes two to tango. One day he doesn't want to talk. The next day this guy doesn't want to talk, when, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine.
Precisely. This is not a both-and situation at all. And U.S. national security interests are at stake. And I noted how much President Trump uses the present tense, I am running, out of patience. We're well beyond that point, and the rest of the world takes note. Yeah. And a friend and colleague recently wrote a column, I think a very thoughtful essay in the Dispatch, Eric Edelman.
Yeah.
And the title of that, quoting former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, was "Weakness is Provocative."
Wow.
And I think President Trump is sending a signal of weakness, which is very dangerous for the United States and the world.
Well, you remember Barack Obama's red line in Syria. That's something that Donald Trump talked about a lot. This has been going on. There were multiple red lines when it came to Russia. It's been going on for actually months, not weeks. Does it feel to you like the drumbeat on sanctions is getting louder?
I think the challenge we have is the distance between the statements President Trump makes and the action that follows. And the rest of the world watches and calculates. And so I think that we have in President Putin somebody who thinks he's got a red carpet to do what he wants, where he wants.
Saw that carpet in Anchorage.
Precisely.
Let's talk about what happened in Poland, because you would think that this event would be the very thing to trigger, if anything, secondary sanctions. We have an Article 4 incursion. The president was asked about it in that same interview today. And he said, hold on, this may have been a mistake, which is something he said yesterday. And we've heard from Poland on this, as a matter of fact. Donald Tusk himself, the Prime Minister of Poland, on Twitter, we would also wish the drone attack on Poland was a mistake, but it wasn't, and we know it. That's the statement. What does Poland think of this rhetoric?
Well, Poland's been very clear, and I'm sure they're also very concerned. And they're not alone. Others in Europe. This is perhaps one of the few things that Russia's actions in Ukraine and towards Poland that actually unites Europe and European leaders. So we saw the Italian defense minister making strong statements similar to that of Polish leaders, and the NATO, Mark Rutte, the NATO, the lead for NATO, Secretary General, thank you, I believe also made some strong statements. So President Trump isolates himself in the United States when he talks in terms like this is an error, a mistake, and not a deliberate attempt by Putin to do what he's doing.
Do you have any hope for any result to come from an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on this? They're doing that today.
Well, I'll say on another issue, it was interesting, the emergency meeting earlier this week, lost track of days, on Qatar, where the United States joined a unanimous resolution there. So there may be room yet for the Security Council to show some action. Of course, on this issue, it's much more difficult because Russia and China are not going to be in the same place as the United States.
Here we go again. That's right. What was the motivation behind this incursion in Poland? We have an Article 4 that's been triggered here. Is Vladimir Putin trying to find the line on Article 5?
I think that what Putin is doing is consistently testing how far he can go without getting a response or reaction.
He hasn't gotten one yet.
From the United States.
Well, that's right.
He certainly has from NATO and from Europe. But he's focused in on whether President Trump in the United States is going to do anything. There are some actions the United States can take. You mentioned sanctions against the major Russian energy companies, agreeing to Europe's price on oil, putting a cap at $48 a barrel as opposed to the $60 a barrel. making sure, going forward with unfreezing Russian assets, seizing the frozen Russian assets, about $300 billion, and making them available to the Ukrainians. There are tangible moves out there that could be made that the United States could signal in real time, and that's the kind of response I think that Putin needs to see to step back.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we've been talking about this for years, and in the Biden administration, the question we kept asking on the air was, what is there left to sanction? Because the message from the administration was, we have turned the screws in a way that no one ever has in history. How come Joe Biden didn't do all of this?
So Joe Biden did do some of this.
When it comes to secondary sanctions.
Well, I think that some of the things that are being discussed...
I know they cut off the banking system. The Biden administration did a lot. But to think that there was much more to do is surprising to a lot of people.
So I can't give you the specifics right now, but I am fair, because I don't want to misstate.
Sure.
But I am fairly sure that the discussion, for example, on seizing frozen assets and using them was very much on the list, in the near-term list, and I think you probably would have seen that if there was a second Biden administration.
Okay.
I think the nature of the sanctions on the Russian energy companies was done to some degree, but could be strengthened as well. So that's why I point to some of those steps.
I just wonder if there was a strategy there in holding back some of this stuff so you still had arrows in the quiver.
Fair point.
Yeah.
I think it was a calibrated. I think there was a lot of tension and pushing probably within the Biden administration about when to do more and how. There certainly was on what kind of equipment to give to Ukraine and to make accessible to them.
Yes. You mentioned Qatar. The president's dealing with a couple of hot issues right now. This is just not only Ukraine and not only Gaza. When Vladimir Putin is sending drones into Poland and Benjamin Netanyahu is sending missiles into Doha, the temperature's rising inside this administration when it comes to geopolitics.
I think, yes. And as you said at the beginning of the broadcast, it's been quite a week. I mean, it's hard to imagine all the stuff that's happened this week.
Do you believe that the president does have the assurance of Benjamin Netanyahu that that will not happen again? The negotiators were in town when those missiles landed.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of any assurances, though frankly I'm skeptical of assurances the president gives to others as well as the assurances he receives. Because I think my biggest concern is he is seen as a weak leader.
Boy.
And other leaders around the world are calibrating against that.